case against Mr. Ongwen will get started in The Hague. Court proceedings far away from here at the premises of the court in The Hague. But I am here because of the fact that I want to be with the affected communities, with the victims of the crimes of which Mr. Ongwen is alleged to be responsible for. And I want to see what the reactions are. I want to be and hear from victims, from affected communities, about what the impact of those proceedings are on the people here in this part of Uganda. I think the trial is important because of 3 reasons. 1 second. Yeah. Okay, good. The trial, in my view, is historic for 3 reasons. First, it is about accountability. The accountability of Mr. Ongwen, a question as to whether or not he is responsible for the crimes that are included in the indictment that the prosecutor have brought against him. It's for the judges, through a fair and effective trial, to determine the guilt or innocence of Mr. Ongwen. It's got to be a long trial because there are 70 charges in the indictment. There are many witnesses that need to be heard. There are the victims that are entitled to participate, to bring their views to the proceedings. And that simply takes time in order for the judges to use all evidence presented and determine in a fair, independent and impartial way whether indeed Mr. Ongwen is responsible for those crimes. The second reason why the trial is so important is because it is an incredible, important opportunity for the voice of victims, for the victims to be heard in those proceedings. Victims have been, have seen the consequences of many years of atrocities taking place in this part of the country. As I mentioned, as I met with victims yesterday, they are saying the war is not over. For us, the war goes on. And that is a very powerful statement. I'm impressed with that statement. And that voice needs to be heard also in the courtroom. And through 2 different teams that represent well over 4,000 victims, who are also provided legal assistance by the court in order to organize an effective form of victim participation, we will hear those voices throughout the proceedings, in written submissions, in questions to witnesses, and all other ways. So that is the second reason. And the third reason is, if we come to the end of the trial, and if indeed Mr. Ongwen were to be held responsible for the crimes being charged against him, we can also start the process of reparations. Reparations for victims and reparations for the damage, the impact that the crimes have had on him. For these 3 reasons, this is a historic day. But the organization of such a trial is a complicated exercise. And having organized, in itself it was a big challenge to have as many victims participate in the proceedings. We worked very hard to bring as many victims on board, but we recognized that not all have been able to participate and to submit their application in time. But we will continue to have an intensive campaign of information to everyone over here to ensure that everyone who is interested in the trial can follow the proceedings. In addition to that, I mentioned witnesses. Witnesses can be vulnerable. Witnesses also play an incredibly important role in the trial. Without their testimony, a trial is not possible. And so the protection of witnesses, the support to witnesses, psychological support, any other form of support is absolutely crucial. That is also my responsibility as a registrar, and I take the responsibility very serious, because again, without the role of witnesses, a trial is simply not possible. So these are a number of activities that we will undertake, these are a number of responsibilities that I have, and as I said, hereby I would like to conclude my introductory words. through an intensive campaign, through radio, summaries of proceedings, SMS activities, etc. We will try to provide maximum information to the people here in this part of Uganda to follow the proceedings. Thanks very much, and if I have any other questions, then I'm more than happy to answer. Yes, please go ahead.
Charlotte Jose from Registrar International. You decided to guarantee the legal help for the victims. Could you explain us why and give us detail about what you are going to give for the victims?
Yeah. We have, as I mentioned, we have two teams. At the beginning of the proceedings, the Office of the Principal Counsel for Victims was appointed as the representative for victims. However, at the same time, there were many victims that chose another counsel to represent. It was only very recently, last week, that I was in a position to take a decision to also provide legal aid to that team. And I did so because of the fact that that team represents well over 2,500 victims, and it's only with legal assistance that they are able to continue their activity that so far was done pro bono. And so that they will have sufficient resources in order to be present in the courtroom, but also to have representation here in order to ensure communication with the victims here. I'm very happy that I was able to take the decision. I would have preferred to do it earlier, but it was good to do it at this moment, and it's just in time for the start of the trial. And I hope that that team will be able to put up a very effective form of participation of all the victims that we represent.
My name is Kasim Kaira from Azam TV. First question is about witness protection. This is quite a big thing, I mean, considering previous trials, especially with other international criminal tribunals like the one for Rwanda, where particular cases fell through because of the issue of witness protection. Considering these big jeeps that come into a village that is grass-thatched, coming to someone's home, it almost becomes automatic that people will know that this person needs to testify. In communities that are trying to heal, how much protection, how are you going to ensure that actually witness protection happens? The second question is about reparations, the compensation. Where is that money going to come from? Because it has been an issue in many cases. There are some people who have lost cases, and yet, even now, they have not received any compensation. How is it that the ICC now will be able to find reparations for the LRA victims, especially considering as well there are thousands of people that have been affected? And finally, would you say there are any lessons that you've learned from previous ICC experiences? The Kenyan leader's case just fell through, the Uhuru Kenyatta Ruto case. Witnesses dropping off as quickly as possible. Are there lessons that you think you've learned from these previous experiences? Jean-Pierre Bemba's case almost fell through as well. So are there lessons that you've learned from this particular experience that you think will inform this particular trial going ahead?
Okay. Thanks very much for your questions. I think they're all three very pertinent ones. I can tell you that if we are in contact with witnesses, we don't come in big lorries with CD plates on it. We have more subtle ways of communicating with our witnesses because we recognize as well that of course would only expose witnesses. So there are ways in which we communicate with witnesses. That of course is a role for the prosecutor and also for the defense to do that themselves. My role is that when witnesses have been identified by the two parties, the prosecution and the defense, that we are in contact with witnesses, that we make a security assessment, that we are in regular contact with them in order to see whether there are any developments that witnesses are worried about. And then also prior to, during and after testimony, we update that security assessment. We have different methods, but we also rely on the national authorities. The responsibility for witness protection also is a national responsibility. In addition to that, we have our own responsibilities and are able, if really necessary, to go to very exceptional measures like the relocation of witnesses, either within the country or even outside of the country. Of course, it's a last resort, because you don't want to take a witness out of his or her own society environment that he or she feels comfortable. So it definitely is a last resort. but if necessary, we are able to take those measures. Reparations, as I mentioned, it comes at the end of the process, and in case there is indeed a conviction of Mr. Onwin, the principle first is that an accused himself, in this case himself, is responsible for the payment. If that is not possible, the court has to look at other means for that. It is too early to really look into the details of that question, but I do recognize that given the number of victims, both of the scope of the case as we have it in the indictment, but of course also way beyond this particular case, because there are many more victims, of course, than those related to the crimes for which Mr. Onwin is considered to be responsible. And that goes beyond the means, of course, of a particular accused person. We have also, in partnership with the Trust Fund for Victims and Trust Fund for Victims, there are voluntary contributions from states to provide all kinds of support. That is never enough, but we do the maximum that we can. Lessons learned from other cases, yes, definitely. And of course, at the court, we have been equally frustrated about the outcome of the cases in Kenya. The fact that we were not able to come to a final determination of guilt or innocence. I'm not making any comments about that, but the mere fact that the judges were not able to pursue that case in order to do their role as a judge and determine that, of course, is a source of frustration for everyone. We also seen in the Bemba case issues of interference of witnesses, but that case also shows that we have taken any such interferences very serious. And we had a recent conviction of 5 people, including Mr. Bemba himself, for interfering with witnesses. So we do take any attempts to obstruct the administration of justice very serious. These are lessons learned, but it also means that we have to be extremely careful with the witnesses in any proceedings before the court, including, of course, this case. I hope that answers your question. Yes, please.
Michael Hagan from AFP. Just following on from that last answer, given past experience in the ICC and also your experience in Sierra Leone, Lebanon and the former Yugoslavia, what counts as success for the ICC in this case? Secondly, you mentioned that this is expected to be a long case. What kind of timescale are you looking at, and how long is too long for this case to come to reach a conclusion? Expectations are running very high in much of the affected communities here. What have you done as the ICC to manage expectations and give a realistic expectation of what's going to happen? And lastly, you mentioned there the role of the national authorities in witness protection. In addition to that, much of the evidence that will be used has come from the Ugandan government. What, if any, quid pro quos have taken place between any officer of the court and the Ugandan government about its role in supply of evidence and witness protection?
All right. Thanks very much. Success, for me, success means that the court and the other tribunals as well, that this court is able to organize a fair and efficient trial with full respect for the rights and obligations of the prosecutor, also rights and obligations of the defense, and of course rights and obligations of victims that are participating in our proceedings. For me, success is not a conviction. For me, success is a fair trial by which the judges are able, in an independent and impartial way, with the evidence that is necessary, to determine indeed guilt or innocence. That, in my view, adds to the credibility of the institution, and that is what I consider to be a success for the institution as such. I would be hesitant to put a timeline to the length of this trial. Judicial proceedings, especially of a nature as complex as the kind of proceedings that you see before the court, can always be full of challenges. I'm very much aware that the judges are very keen to speed up the trial as much as possible, but of course also adequate time for the prosecutor and the defense to prepare themselves is an ingredient of a fair trial. So we don't know exactly how long the trial will going to be, how many witnesses will be heard, how much time it will take for each and every witness. Of course, the victims participate. They want to have their voices being heard as well. So it's impossible to put a timeline. If I'm not able to put that in there, I'd rather not do it. At the same time, of course, it does beg the question, as you say. The people here in Uganda, and particularly this part of Uganda, have of course been waiting for a long time before this day was happening, before this trial was started. You know, we're talking about more than 10 years that people have been waiting. But what I've seen in my contacts with civil society, with cultural, political leaders, I just came out of a meeting where someone was saying, we are patient because we recognize that this trial does take time. But that is about effective communication, that is about ensuring that there is regular updates about our proceedings. We recognize that it is nearly impossible to follow the proceedings on a daily basis. So we will, through all kinds of mechanisms, summaries of proceedings, radio programs, SMS messages, etc., we will have an intensive campaign to keep people involved and informed, and that hopefully will ensure that people will continue to see that every single step is necessary. You know, justice delayed is justice denied, but as long as people see that justice continues to go on, the confidence in the process will, I'm convinced, will continue to be there. So I hope we, through our measures, we will be able to bring that level of confidence in people that this case will go on and will come to an end in a fair and effective way.
There's a couple of other questions there about the evidence, any quid pro quo between the Ugandan government.
Sorry, no, I forgot about that one. I must say that in general, the cooperation with the national authorities is very constructive, and we have seen no problems. We are in regular contact on all different levels. People that deal with witness protection issues, etc., are having their contacts. So many other contacts. There's no quid pro quo. There is an obligation under the statute for Uganda as a state party to cooperate, and we see that cooperation, that obligation is fully implemented.
And the expectations, managing expectations?
Managing expectations, I think is, you know, there's so many expectations with so many different people. You know, the audience, victims, affected communities. I think it's communication is absolute key to manage those expectations and to continue to ensure that people are engaged in that process. But it's not easy because indeed the process will take a long time. But the more we are able to do effective communication, that's also why I keep on emphasizing that, the more we will be able indeed to ensure that those expectations can be met.
If I may add something. This morning we published a Q&A, and it's apropos your question about managing expectation in relation to duration of the trial. And we already indicated, and this is like this message we come across every single time when we interact with communities, and we already indicated the trial may last several years depending on the complexity of the trial. So it is not just print media, we also have a radio campaign ongoing since last 8 months. We engage with communities, and we will have this week also some new tools launched to assist communities to get information in the process. So this is our attempt to manage expectations. Thank you.
I'm Mokanakoli Emma from Northern Uganda Media Club. In the most likelihood that when you get a conviction, which countries are ready to receive him, knowing that you will not really detain him at where he's actually being detained at the moment. The second one is, from the ICC's perspective, what should this mean for the people of Northern Uganda, the commencements of the trial from when?
Enforcement of sentences, of course, that comes only at the very end of the process, including maybe an appeal. We have, or the court has an agreement with a number of states with which we have a special agreement for the enforcement of sentences. Indeed, the sentence will not take place in the Netherlands. The accused stay during the trial in the Netherlands in a prison very close to our ICC premises. But once the trial is over, and in principle, if there is a conviction of an imprisonment, then that will take place in another country. We have a number of countries that have volunteered to have that agreement, but it's only at that stage that the President of the Court will engage with states and determine to what country that Mr. Ongwen were to be going. But of course, it is all based on the assumption, and I have to be, as a neutral officer of the court, have to, of course, respect the presumption of innocence until the very end, and only in the case of a conviction that were to be the process to be followed by the President. What does it mean for the population in this part of the country, in northern Uganda? I hope it means a lot, and I think that I've been here now for 2 days in Kampala and here in Gulu. I think it means a lot for people. People have been victims of crimes, not only of Mr. Ongwen, but of course of others as well. And as one person said to me yesterday, a victim herself, she said, you know, for me the war is not over, the war goes on. And for me that trial will mean that the international community does something about the impunity gap and does deal with people who are considered to be responsible for such crimes. I think that means a lot. Does that mean that the court can do everything to undo what has happened? Of course not. The court is not a panacea for all problems in this part of the country. But we can make a substantial contribution. But it's other forms, it's reparations, it's rebuilding society, it is reconciliation that has to be done as well. The court can play a role, but there are other players, of course, involved in that process as well.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Moses Sidonia. I work here at the Northern Uganda Registrar. You said reparations will come towards the end, and reparations have been, there's a big debate around reparations. But can you break it down for us, for the local audience to understand? If you say reparations, what does it precisely mean in tangible terms?
Yeah. That is an easy question, but not an easy answer, to be perfectly honest. The court is at this moment, in a couple of other cases, starting for the first time with the implementation and the development of reparation orders. It can be individual reparation, it can be collective reparations, it can be symbolic reparations. It is very difficult to be very concrete and say what kind of reparations can take place here. It much depends on the final conviction, if a conviction will follow of Mr. Ongwen, for which charges, who are the victims of those crimes for which he could have been found guilty. So it's too early to be very concrete about that. But the kind of examples that we can think of is, given the often what is happening is that given the scale of the crimes that have been committed, you probably have to think more in terms of collective forms of reparations than individual forms of reparations. That being said, if people may have been mutilated as a result of concrete crimes, then there are, of course, possibilities for individual medical treatment of victims. So there's a wide variety of possibilities. At this moment, it's very difficult to be too concrete. At the same time, also, I would like to take this opportunity to mention that in addition to the victims of the crimes for which Mr. Ongwen is held responsible, within the Rome Statute system, we also have the Trust Fund for Victims, who deals with victims of the situation here in Uganda, and of course that is a much wider group, and they have a huge number of activities undertaken already since 2008 in partnership with local organizations. So a lot of it is already ongoing and continues to go on in the coming years.
Yes, my name is Blackstar. We talked about serious campaign for victims, so that they're going to be hard. But the Ugandan came here a week ago, and they were saying that the victims are radio campaign and media, print media campaign to reach them, to their peers?
A good question. I think it follows up with what I just said. As far as the, of course, it is for the prosecutor to determine what kind of cases she wanted to investigate and what she has been investigated. So we're talking about the case of Mr. Ongwen. We're talking about still 2 other people whose arrest warrants are still outstanding. But as I said, the victims of crimes in this part of the country go way beyond the activities for which those people so far have been held responsible. And so here again, it is also for the Trust Fund for Victims in partnership with other organizations to provide activities of support for victims of the situation in this part of the country in totality, so way beyond the cases that the court is dealing with. And that hopefully, and I've seen proof of that over the last couple of days, that does assist in reaching out to victims and bringing perspective. Of course, we are not in a position, and it's not realistic to assume that the court itself or the trust fund would be able to undo or to provide effective reparations for all victims. That is just beyond the capabilities of the court. There are responsibilities of others out there, of course, as well. But for the court, we do the maximum with our resources, and also for the Trust Fund for Victims with voluntary contributions for states, we do the maximum possible with those resources that we have.
One more question, please.
I am Okelo Bernard from Gul FM. On what major extent is the ICC and Ugandan government trying to bring other perpetrators of this atrocity committed to book? Or it's just stopping with Dominic Ongwen?
As far as I'm concerned, and as far as the court is concerned, of course, we have 2 more indictments and warrants of arrest that are still outstanding. And so in that case, we don't stop our activities until also those warrants of arrest have been implemented. We had to wait for 10 years for Mr. Ongwen to be transferred to the court. And let's not forget that the ICC is a permanent court. We are there to stay, and we continue our activities also for other indictments, and we hope that we will be successful one day in order to bring other cases to the court.
Thank you.
Нет, это